get all of this material, so don't worry about having to write a lot. You'll be able to review it later. About questions later, keep it to the topic, IHSS. And also, if you have a case you want to talk about, it's best that you reach out to us so that you don't start to provide a lot of private information in front of everyone. Okay, so we're going to talk about applying for IHSS, the importance of a self-assessment, talk about the services that are offered. And then we're going to talk about, we're going to switch topics, so to speak, and we're going to talk about the different programs under IHSS and things that reduce the hours that you'll get. And then we're going to look at some of the tools that are used by social workers in coming up with time. And then briefly go over some changes to the parent provider of minor child rules. We're going to review a notice of action and appeals, and you have a lot of resources here. All of the IHSS forms are found online. The regulations are found online. We have a manual online. And the California Department of Social Services is the state agency that administers the IHSS program. And they send out letters like all county information letters, all county notices on different topics with regard to IHSS. So I've left some of these. I've included some of those here, but they're a lot more than what's here. So in any event, so in order to apply for IHSS, you have to have Medi-Cal. If you do not have Medi-Cal, you cannot apply for IHSS. And so, but once you have Medi-Cal, you can apply for IHSS. And what the county is going to require is that a licensed healthcare professional fill out what is called, can you please mute yourself, please? Or Lonnie, if you can mute everyone except for me for the time being. The county's going to ask you to fill out what is called the SOC 873. All of the forms have a number. They usually start with SOC and then a number. So this form is the healthcare certification form. It has to be filled out before the county will even consider coming out and doing an assessment, because that's what's going to happen. After you apply, there will be a social worker who's going to come to the house, assess the situation, assess the need, and then issue after that a notice of action. That notice of action will say, yes, you qualify, and these are the hours in the categories we're going to give you, or no, you don't qualify. So it's really important that when you give this form to a licensed healthcare professional, and there are examples of what they consider to be licensed healthcare professionals, make sure you talk to the person about the program, because that person, that doctor, whomever, may have a different idea about what in-home supported services is. So you've got to educate them. I say that before the social worker comes out to do the assessment, you should be prepared. And that preparation includes filling out a self-assessment worksheet. So you decide, because you're going to need to tell the social worker, well, what services do you want? Why do you need the service? How much time do you want? Why do you need the time? And you can do all of that by doing a self-assessment. Now, this one here is the one we have online. You can find it. What I like about this assessment is that it's simple. It tells you all the services that are available. So you've got domestic services. You've got related services. These are what are called related services: meal prep, meal cleanup, laundry, errands, etc. You've got heavy cleaning, non-medical personal care services, lots of subcategories under that. You've got transportation to and from medical appointments, or to an alternative resource, let's say a day program. yard hazard abatement, protective supervision. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, and paramedical services. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So it's really important that you be prepared. The second part, this is a 3-part training. The second part of the training is where I teach you how to really do a good self-assessment, and we use a different form that some of us created. But this one's good just to understand, what services are provided under IHSS, in-home supported services. You're going to see, for example, it says, usually for shopping and errands, it's 30 minutes a week max, 60 minutes for laundry in the home, 90 minutes if you have to go out of the home. But these all are based on the hourly task guidelines. And you can get more than this time if you can show an exception to the hourly task guidelines. And we're going to look at them too. So what I want to say is here, for example, domestic services limited 6 hours per month. It's just a guideline. I was able to get a gentleman who needed a lot of domestic services over 30 hours. I went to a hearing because the county would say to me, "Oh no, the most you can get is 6 hours." And I'm like, "No." And I'm telling you why he needs more. And well, no, if you don't like it, you can go to hearing. And we did, and we won. So I want you to remember that example when you're thinking about how much time to ask for a service, or when the social worker says, "Oh, that's the most we can give you." Well, no, I know you're talking about the hourly task guidelines, but remember, if there's an exception, you can give us more. So let's talk a little bit about protective supervision. It is the only service in the IHSS program where they pay a provider to supervise someone. Could be an adult, could be a child. This is an all-county letter that was issued by CDSS in 2015, and it provides clarifications about the protective supervision program. All this information is good for adults and for minors. When we're talking about minors, there's 4 criteria that you have to meet. When we're talking about adults, there's only 3. And so in order to get protective supervision, you have to show that the person has a mental disability. It could be developmental, psychiatric, could be traumatic brain injury, dementia, whatever mental disability that causes the person to be non-self-directing. What does that mean? That the person, because of their mental disability, the person doesn't understand that the behavior they're doing or about to do is going to cause them injury. Second criterion, you have to show that the person has a need to be supervised 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The program won't pay for that, but it does require that the person need to be supervised 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It requires that the person have the physical capacity to get into danger. You don't have to get into danger to get this service, but you have to physically be able to get into danger. And for minors, and not for adults, you have to show that the minor of that age needs more supervision than a typical child of the same age. And that to me is really easy to prove when you start to talk about behaviors. And you compare your 10-year-old and the behaviors that your 10-year-old has with a typical 10-year-old, easy to do. So that's the criteria. It's not enough to say, "Oh, my child needs to be supervised because he has autism and, and he needs to be supervised." That's not enough. You have to be able to meet, for a child, the 4 criteria, for an adult, just 3, not the 4th one, not the one where you have to show that the child needs more supervision than a child of the same age without a disability. So this is a really good all-county letter. Judges refer to this, counties refer to this, so really important. The county will also require that a healthcare professional fill out what is called the SOC 821, where it is, CSOC 821, and this is called the assessment of need for protective supervision, and the healthcare provider will check off what the provider feels is the person's deficit in memory, orientation, and judgment. This in and of itself will not get you protective supervision. What happens is that the county will gather information, evidence, and based on all the evidence that the county gathers, including the SOC 821, if it's available. If you don't provide it to the county, they're going to use what they have to decide protective supervision. And so based on all of the evidence, the county will decide whether you meet the criteria for protective supervision. So even if the doctor says severe in memory, severe in orientation, and severe in judgment, that's not going to get you protective supervision. It used to, but not anymore. And the program is also going to want you to fill out, this is the SOC 825. This is the 24 hours a day coverage plan, because remember, one of the criterion is that you have to show that the person needs to be supervised 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So how is that going to happen Monday through Sunday? And that's what they want to know. And these are the instructions for that. So let's move on to another service, which is paramedical services. To get paramedical services, a doctor is going to, or a healthcare professional is going to have to fill out an SOC 321 form. And this is our publication on paramedical services. Their skilled tasks necessary to maintain the recipient's health, and the recipient can't perform that task. So this is part of the definition of what is a paramedical service. Anything that requires administration of medications other than putting the medication on the table or in a medicine, a medication, those little plastic things, dispenser. If you have to crush the medicine, put it in the food, put it in the tube, put it in the mouth, that's a paramedical service. Puncturing the skin, anything that involves inserting a medical device in any opening of the body, anything that requires sterile procedures or other activities requiring training by a licensed healthcare professional. And so that's part of the definition of what a paramedical service is. Also, so these are examples of what paramedical services are. Like I said, the administration of medications, injections, nasal tube, G-tube feeding, stoma care, tracheostomy care, suctioning, skin and wound care if someone has a bed sore, a catheter insertion changes, etc., colostomy, digital stimulation, range of motion exercises if they need to be done at home. That's a paramedical service. We also have a list of other services we believe are paramedical services, so you can look at all of this. Now, these are the questions you have to ask yourself when you're thinking, oh, is this a paramedical service or not? You have to, if you answer yes to all of these questions, then most likely it is a paramedical service. Was it ordered by a licensed healthcare professional? Is it something that you would do for yourself except for your functional limitations? Is it necessary to maintain your health because of a mental condition or physical condition? Does the task involve any of those things we went through? So these are the questions you want to ask yourself. Sometimes something can be either a personal care service or a paramedical service. So in this publication, we talk about when administering medications can be considered personal care versus paramedical, range of motion exercises, repositioning or rubbing the skin, respiration, finger and toenail care. Lots of really good information here. And like I said, the county will require, sorry that I do this, I know, it's just that I need to get through the material this way. The SOC 321, which is this form right here, The doctor signs and fills it out. And then we'll put the type of service. Let's say that it's range of motion exercises, time required to perform the service each time it's performed, the frequency, and how long will these service be needed? 6 months, 2 months, infinity, who knows? That all has to be filled out. And if the healthcare provider wants to put more information in the comments section, he or she can. And you will not get this service unless this form is submitted to the county. I'm going to stop talking about services, and now I'm going to talk about things that can affect the maximum hours you can get, and things that reduce the hours that you get. So when we're talking about the IHSS program, we're actually talking about 4 different programs, 4 different funding streams. There's the Personal Care Services Program, Community First Option, IHSS Plus Option, and the Residual Program. Now, I'm going to get to this chart in a moment, but I want to explain what each program is. So if you are a spouse provider or a parent provider of, if you are a spouse provider or a parent provider, then you cannot be placed in the Personal Care Services Program. So if that's going to be the case, then they're not going to put you in the Personal Care Services Program. The Community First Option Program is when, and the test for this is, if you were not living at home, would you meet the criteria to enter a nursing facility level of care per the CFCO program? And they'll list levels of care because there are different levels of care in institutions. It doesn't require that you go into the institution. It just requires that if you weren't living at home, you would be able to enter the institution. And so my kids are under this program, adults are under this program. So that's the CFCO program. The IHSS Plus Option Program is where there's a parent provider, spouse provider. Of course, you're not going to be in the CFCO program. And so, it's possible that you might be placed in that program. The IHSS Residual Program is for people who, because of their immigration status, they can't receive benefits from programs where the federal government is participating. So this is the only program where the federal government is not helping to pay for IHSS services. So this is a state program. And so it could be because when you become a lawful permanent resident, for example, you can't apply for SSI for 5 years. You can't apply for Medi-Cal where there's federal financial participation. Well, fortunately, California has a lot of programs that are state-only programs, Medi-Cal state-only programs. So that's not a problem. Someone who's a PRU-call, a person residing under color of law, would be someone who would be placed under the residual program. So depending on what program you are in will depend the maximum hours you're able to get in the IHSS program. Another thing, two more things. For protective supervision, there are only 2 hours that you can get, one of 2. If you're severely impaired, you can get up to 283. If you're non-severely impaired, you could get up to 195. Secondly, if you're considered non-severely impaired in the program, that means that you need 20 or more hours a week in any of the following services: meal prep, meal cleanup, paramedical services, and personal care services. So any of those services, if they add up to 20 hours or more a week, then you're considered severely impaired. So if they put you on the PCSP program and you're non-severely impaired, you can get up to 283 hours. If you need protective supervision and you're not severely impaired and you're on the PCSP program, you're going to get 195 protective supervision. And let's say that you need 50 hours in other categories like personal care, transportation, paramedical. Well, you'll be able to get them because 195 plus 50 does not equal 283. It's below 283, right? So that you can do. The same holds true for the CFCO program. Where it differs is if they put you in the IPO program or the residual and you are non-severely impaired, the maximum you could get under the program is 195 hours. So in that hypothetical where I said, what happens with those 50 hours in other categories of services? If you're in the IPO or residual program and you're non-severely impaired, you will not get those 50 hours because the maximum you're able to get is 195. If you want to know more about each program, you can go to the All County letter and it's here. You can even Google it and you'll find it. And there it is. There's more information here that you can review. But I wanted to go over the two things that are going to reduce your hours. So when a social worker comes, is deciding how much time to give you, the first thing the social worker is going to do is decide your total hours of need. And from there can be a deduction for a proration, and there can be deduction for another thing I'm going to talk about in a moment. So let's say that I am living with someone else, and that person is not in the IHSS program, and I get meal prep time, and my provider makes my meals and makes enough food for that other person who's living with me to eat the same food. Well, the program is going to say to me, well, Maria, that person's not in the IHSS program, and there's no reason why we should be paying the provider to make meals to that person. So what we're going to do is we're going to take your total hours of need, and we're going to divide it by the number of people who are benefiting from the service that the provider is doing. And so they're going to take, let's say that my hours of need per week in meal prep are 10 hours divided by 2. So rather than getting 10 hours a week, I'm going to get 5. And you can only prorate in the following categories: domestic services, meal prep, meal cleanup, laundry, shopping, errands, and heavy cleaning. So those are the areas of proration. Alternative resources. This is where someone is getting IHSS-like services through another program. So let's say, for example, I get 10 hours of meal prep through IHSS, but 3 days a week I go to an adult daycare center where they provide me with breakfast and lunch. Well, part of my need is being satisfied through this day program. So what the IHSS program is going to do is going to take my hours of need and reduce it and deduct the hours of alternative resources. So proration and alternative resources will reduce the time that you get. And this also talks about who's severely impaired, so that you have that information. And then how to calculate monthly hours. Lots of good information in this publication that you can look at. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about the tools that most of the tools that the social workers use in deciding how much time to give you. So when the social worker is ready to decide a case, the social worker is going to rank each service that you asked for. So, and here are the rankings. Rank 1 is your independent. They're not going to give you any time. Rank 2 is the only ranking where they pay a provider to provide verbal assistance, reminding, guiding. So if I'm someone who can do the task, but I forget because of my disability to eat, to shower, to dress, then I can have a provider to prompt me to do those things. Rank 3, I can do the service, but I need some help from a provider. Rank 4, I can do the service, but only with substantial human assistance. And rank 5, I can't do it. I need total human assistance. And rank 6 is reserved for paramedical services. When we're talking about minors below the age of 18, when they rank 1, and I'm going to show you a functional index ranking chart for children, 1 means they're not going to give it to you unless there's an extraordinary need, and I'll explain that. So when you see a 1 for a child, it doesn't mean that they're independent. It just means they're not going to give it to you. Well, even here, the rank 1, they're not going to give it to you. So I guess that makes sense. So once the ranking is done, then the social worker will look to the hourly task guidelines. And as you see here, each ranking has its own color. And this one in meal prep, let's say that I requested 10 hours and I gave a lot of information as to why it takes 10 hours a week to prepare my meals. And the social worker is going to look at this hourly task guidelines and see, oh, the low amount of hours that she can give is 7, mid 7, high 7 a week. But remember what I said, these are just guidelines. And if there's an exception for more time, I can get more time. I can get more than 7 hours. Also, if there's an exception for less time, the social worker can give me less time. If all I eat every day is a piece of toast and coffee for breakfast, and someone has to, take frozen dinners and heat them up for me, it's not going to take 7 hours to prepare my meals. And so that'll be an exception because of what I eat for less than 7 hours a week in meal prep. But if I'm someone who needs to have my food pureed, I need to eat multiple times because of my disability, and whatever other dietary restrictions that can cause, that there be a lot of time allotted for meal prep. And let's say that I get my notice of action and the social worker, and I said to my social worker, I can't do it because of my disabilities and so forth and so on. And I expect she'll rank me a 5. I call her up and I say, and she gives me 7 hours in meal prep. And I said, well, why did you give me 7 hours when I asked for 10? And she'll say, oh, Maria, that's the most I can give you. And I'm going to say, I know you're looking at the hourly task guidelines, but and I know that there are exceptions to the guidelines. And I gave you a lot of information as to why I should get 10 hours. And I can get one of 2 responses. Let me look at this again. But the more likely response is, well, Maria, if you're not happy, you can go to a hearing. And that's about it. And so remember domestic services, 6 hours max. Well, I got a client, I had to go to a hearing, but I got him over 30 hours. So remember that the guidelines are only guidelines. If you have an exception for more, they can give you more. If you don't need the hours at the lowest ranking of each, the lowest hours of each ranking, they're going to give you less than what the ranking says. So that's what happens. Now, when we're talking about kids, let me just make this a little smaller so that we can all see. This is the functional index ranking chart that you need to use. So parents, if you're thinking, well, what services can my child get? You need to start here. well, you need to look at the functional index ranking to understand what it is, the ranks, but then you have to start here. Because what this does is it gives you age in the first column, 0 to 17, and it tells you what rankings are available for the services that are listed here. So housework, there's a 1 all the way down. And in the notes, under the second note, it says minors who live with their parent providers must be assessed a functional index ranking of 1 in housework, regardless of extraordinary need. So if you're a parent provider of a minor child, your child will not get any time for domestic services, period, end of story. Doesn't matter if there's an extraordinary need. But if you look at the note 1, it says all minors should be assessed a functional index ranking of 1 when identified above, unless an extraordinary need is documented. Well, what does that mean? I'll give you an example of a case that I went to hearing on. So 12-year-old uses diapers, has multiple disabilities, accidents throughout the day, linens get soiled also. He likes to put his hand in his diaper and just smear all over. So lots of personal care here. But anyway, at the hearing, the father testified that he goes to the laundromat 3 times a week. The first time is to do his laundry and his son's laundry. Only the two of them live together. And then the next 2 times that he goes to the laundry is because of his son's disabilities and that he soils and what he does. So it's only to wash his son's linens and clothes. The judge in the decision said, well, that first time that the father goes and does the laundry for the family, that's not extraordinary need. Parents do that for a 12-year-old. So there's nothing extraordinary about doing that. But those 2 additional times that the father has to go because of the son's disability, that's an extraordinary need. It's not something that the father would have to do if the child was typical, if the child didn't have a disability, because a 12-year-old knows how to go to the bathroom, right? Doesn't wear diapers. So that's what they mean by extraordinary need, above and beyond what a parent would do for a typical child the same age as your child with a disability. So when a social worker says, oh no, it's your responsibility as a parent, they're not really explaining it correctly, because what they're looking at is they know that the functional index ranking, is a 1, but what they're not telling you or asking you is, well, is there an extraordinary need? What above and beyond are you doing that you wouldn't do for a typical child of the same age as your child? And that's where extraordinary need comes in. So, for example, if we're looking at an 8-year-old for hygiene, bathing, oral hygiene, and grooming, you can use the functional index rankings of 1 through 5. This tells you what index rankings you can use, and if there's a 1, you have to show extraordinary need. Otherwise, they're not going to give you time. Now, I wanted to just, there were some changes that were done to the regulations with when a parent of a minor can be a provider. In the old days, it used to be that if you were working full time, you couldn't be a parent provider. If there was another provider in the house, that parent had to be unavailable in order for the parent who wanted to be the provider. Well, that doesn't matter anymore. You can be working full time and be a provider. There could be another parent in the home. You can still be the provider with the following caveat. Any kids who are in the PCSP program, the counties were instructed to try to move those kids into the other programs like the CFCO, residual, or IPO programs. As long as that happens, then these rules apply. But if the county can't take the child out of the PCSP program, then the old rules apply to the parent. The parent can't be the provider. So it's much broader. There's been no change as to who can be a provider. You still have to have authorization to work in the U.S. to be a provider. So this is our publication on that. And that is that. And then lastly, I wanted to show you what a notice of action looks like. This is for someone who's already getting services. And here you see, in the first column, you see all of the services. So let's use meal preparation. Then total amount of service need. Let's say that I need, 10 hours of meal prep. This is my need. What the social worker has decided is my need for the week in meal prep. And let's say that she agrees I should get 10. So she'll put 10 in the second column. And if there's any proration, then it's going to happen here. So if that other person is eating the same meals the provider makes, and not in the IHSS program, then the IHSS worker is going to get those 10 hours in the second column divided by 2. That gives you 5. So you put 5 hours under proration, and the remaining 5 hours goes into the fourth column. And then further reduction, if you, here it says services you refused. I've never seen that happen. Or you get from others. This is the alternative resources column. So from the fourth column, you can have a further reduction in the fifth column. And then the now is what the hours are in this notice of action. The was if you were getting that service before, what it was before, and whether what they're giving you now is an addition or subtraction of hours. So that's how you work the notice of action. And so we have come to the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to take questions.